Hi, I'm Alan Taffel from the Absolute Sound. This is Andy Quint, also from the Absolute Sound. We are both senior writers for the magazine, and we've been covering the Florida Audio Expo, which used to be abbreviated FLAX, but they've gone and ruined a perfectly good acronym by changing the name to the Florida International Audio Expo. We still haven't figured out how to make a good acronym out of that.
We have a year till next time.
Have a year, exactly. So we are going to today go through some of the things that we have found to be of particular interest. We're each going to tell you about 3 new products that we saw and found to be especially interesting. We're also going to have a little conversation about the rooms that seem like they could qualify for Best of Show. Although we haven't made our final determination, we never do that until the very end because systems do tend to settle in and get better as the show goes on. But we have it narrowed down and we'll tell you who we're thinking about so far, and we haven't discussed this in advance.
This is the best part because for the most part, Alan and I are separated and doing our thing with our product categories during the show. It's only on these last day, these final hours that we get a chance to compare notes.
So let's talk about some of the interesting new products. You want to start, Andy?
I'd be happy to. And inevitably, this at least at this point in the discussion, it ends up being loudspeakers because I think it's easiest to make judgments about what's truly remarkable with loudspeakers as opposed to electronics or even sources. But there were 3 in particular that I'm eager to think more about and to learn more about. First of all, was the new product that I came across from Acora Acoustics, Val Acora from Toronto, who makes his enclosures out of stone, as his family for several generations has had a stone business in Toronto. But he entered this industry 4 or 5 years ago with 3 models and hasn't introduced any since until Florida, where he introduced the largest speaker he's made to date, the VRC, which stands 52 inches tall, which doesn't seem extreme in this world. But when you're making your speakers out of granite, it's consequential. They weigh well over 400 pounds and cost $220,000. And I know you got a chance to hear it too, but I was so impressed by how implacable these speakers were. No matter how loud, no matter how soft they played, their spatial characteristics remained as stable as could be imagined. They were rock solid from top to bottom. Rock solid is probably a good term to use. But I was enormously impressed with these transducers. The second came from a German company, well known to audiophiles, Avant-Garde, and they have a new version, the 3rd in 30 years, of their Duo speaker. And it comes in both active and passive versions for respectively $77,000 and $61,000. And when we're talking about active as an amplified, we're not talking about the bass, which in both models is active, comes with a built-in amplifier, but rather the tweeter and the mid-range. And they have developed a special amplification for that, and the results were really quite remarkable. I have always found that loudspeaker to be a bit on the colored side. These were completely neutral in their presentation of some very demanding classical chamber music. The third item that I came across was from that Swiss company, Clarissus, that both Alan and I were encountering for the first time. This is a company that makes a ribbon full-range speaker, actually 5 versions of it, that are remarkable in that they don't present the sort of challenge when it comes to amplification that older iterations of this type of speaker like the Apogees used to provide. They brought two versions of this speaker, a big one and the smallest one in the series, to Florida. And the larger one is called the Auditorium, and it's $141,000. And it impressed with the sheer magnitude of its presentation and the immediacy, the palpability of what you were hearing. So for me, at least, in my category, which was the high price spread, those were the three products that I'm sort of mulling over now to decide who gets primacy.
And in my category, which is the ostensibly more affordable equipment, that's a relative term, of course, in high-end audio, as all of you viewers know so well. But in my category, there were three products that stood out. One is an iteration on the Aesthetics Mimas integrated amplifier. I've always liked this amplifier. I like Aesthetics. They make great tubed gear, and the Mimas is a really nice integrated amp. It's around 10K, and it's modular, which is really helpful for those trying to build a compact reference system. So it can be a regular integrated, or you can add a DAC card, you can add a phono stage, you can add a streamer card. Very versatile piece of gear. But now what they've done is they've taken that device and they've split it for those who want to separate the preamplifier stage from the power amp and all the digital circuitry from the power amp. So the preamp is called a Paline, and it's 7,500. It's still modular, just like the Mimas was. And then the power amp is called the Dion, and it's 6,500. So there's definitely a premium for buying them as separates, but because of course you're paying for separate chassis and separate power supplies. But the sound driving Focal speakers here was really big and punchy, and yet in the inimitable way of Aesthetics, still very relaxed, and I found it very easy to settle into. So I was excited about that product. On the speaker front, I think the most exciting thing that I heard, besides the Clarissus, which wasn't in my category, is the German Acoustics 30th anniversary edition of the Grand Avant-Garde. So this is a model called the Grand Avant-Garde, not to be confused with the Avant-Garde company that makes the Duo that Andy was talking about. And what's different about this speaker, which costs $17,000, is that there's a new bass trap. It actually looks kind of like a new plinth on the bottom of the speaker. And it's got little holes in it to dissipate the bass, both frontwards and rearwards. According to Gershman Acoustics, it's better dissipation of the bass, so there's less back wave and everything's cleaner. I can tell you that up until that point, I heard that towards the end of the first day of the show, and up until that point, I thought it was the best bass that I'd heard at the show. Then later, I got to hear the big new Acoras that Andy was talking about, and some other systems that had better bass, but those were all much, much more expensive speakers. So I thought that was significant as a new introduction. And lastly, a whole ream of products from a company, that's new to the U.S. The company's called Via Blue. They're a German company, and they make cables. I think we're going to hear a lot from this company. They seem very serious about their entry into the U.S. market, and they seem very serious about their design of the cables, which are quite complex in construction. If you look inside them, any of them, whether it's a speaker cable or a simple interconnect, you see lots of different wires in different topologies with different insulation setups, air pipes, very complicated, and it seems like it would be quite expensive to produce these cables. I don't know how they sound, so I can't speak to that. All I can say is that the construction was heroic, and the price is quite affordable for what it is. I guess I don't even have to say for what it is, because $500 to $1,000 for a 1 meter cable these days is considered pretty reasonable. So that's it for my 3 highlighted products. And now we can start talking about what everyone wants to hear about, which is what was the best sound of the show. And we decided in advance that there would be 4 candidates we would talk about. So what's your first candidate, Andy?
Well, I think in terms of an event, it was the large room that was given over to TAD Components, the Japanese firm that was once a spin-off of Panasonic 80 years ago, that has sort of come under new distributorship. And they brought with them an all TAD system, including the Reference 1 TX loudspeaker, which comes in at a cool $160,000, and then all TAD electronics, preamp, amplifier, DAC. And sort of making the trip especially worthwhile was the presence of the Japanese company's president, and also presentations throughout the show from Jim Anderson and Ulrich Schwartz, his partner, and his wife, who are both A-list engineers. They're responsible for the Patricia Barber recordings. And they played selections from these Patricia Barber recordings through this system. And the sheer palpability of the system was really pretty impressive, though it wasn't beyond criticism.
Yeah, it's always interesting when the manufacturer can bring something new in the way of source material. That happens with Wilson Audio when they have Peter McGrath playing his own tapes.
Yes.
That he himself has recorded and mastered with Wilson gear. That gives him sort of an unfair advantage. But nonetheless, the problem that I had with the TAD room, at least for me, was that it was the mid-range bloom was quite pronounced, and it was just omnipresent in everything that I heard in that room. In fact, there are 2 systems in that room. There's the big one that Andy talked about, and then there's a smaller one showing off a new speaker that they announced. And both had that same mid-range overemphasis. Now, was it the room? Was it just the TAD sound? I don't know, but we don't get paid to make those differentiations. We just report on what we hear, and I don't think that could qualify as best of show. At least to me, I doubt that room could qualify as best of show because of that. Maybe something that was a little better was the Clarissus room. These are the full range ribbon speakers that Andy was talking about. And believe it or not, of the 2, it was actually the room that had the smaller Clarissus speaker. Not to say cheap, they're still over $30K, but that room had a combination of Pass and Hagel electronics, Shunyata cabling top to bottom, and an Orrender server. I think that setup was a little bit better probably than what was behind the big Clarissus speakers down in the ballroom. And I think that I liked the smaller Clarissus setup better, even though it's significantly less expensive than the bigger Clarissus. That is a system that had terrific coherence and tonal balance, and I think certainly is a candidate for best sound at the show. What did you think?
Oh, I agree entirely. I started with the big system downstairs and was awfully impressed. I went upstairs and was even further impressed. And the good news is that I think that smaller speaker at less than a third of the price of the bigger one is going to be plenty for most domestic environments. It certainly would be in my own space. So I was astounded to find that there were actually two models above the big ones that I heard. I think that's for your castle in Switzerland.
So let's see. What was your next candidate?
Well, the next candidate was what was really a big surprise for me, because I have never, in quite a long experience, had such a positive experience with this brand, and that was MBL. The setup of the MBL 101 Mark II loudspeakers with all MBL electronics, as expected, was glorious. I am so used to these speakers, at shows at least, driving me out of the room because of their assaultiveness, because of their aggressiveness. Here I wanted to linger, because these were speakers that truly disappeared and left only the music, whatever music it was that they were playing, in the air.
I like the MBL room very much as well. And I'm gonna hold off. A lot of my comments on the MBL room are kind of relative to the Acora room, so I'm going to hold off and let you talk about the Acora room for a minute, and then let's go back to the MBL.
Well, the Acora room, I've already raved in terms of their new product there. Had the best possible support and the best possible environment. They had the primo space at the show, which was a ballroom that the exhibitor, Val Acora, had been to in previous years and knew just what to do. He had gone to IKEA at one point and purchased 200 pillows, which were strategically deployed around the area just below the ceiling. And he was very happy with the results that he was getting. But with VAC electronics and the new Oracle turntable, the results were stunning. And the results were stunning with all sorts of source material that you didn't know that this could happen. He played a lot of 1970s rock recordings that many of us have admired from a musical standpoint for decades, but have always felt were limited in their technical possibilities. He played one entire side of Jethro Tull's "Thick as a Brick," for example, and I was mesmerized. The sense of what the artists were hearing when they heard that playback in the studio way back when was very acute.
It was certainly impressive as can be. Those are great speakers. I think they're going to be instant classics. They're going to jump to the top tier of audio speakers instantly. They're that good. The room was good, as you say, but you got a very different, and this is my only criticism, you got a very different experience depending on where you were sitting. In fact, in recognition of that, Acora itself had chairs labeled. One was labeled superior, another was labeled outstanding, and then the best one was labeled private concert, written on masking tape attached to the chair. And it's hard to find anything wrong with that Acora room, really. But if I had to say something, it would be that you got a very different presentation depending on where you sat, and that bothered me a little bit. And that's one of the things that I liked a little bit better about the MBL room. With its, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's the omnidirectional speakers, and so they're spreading sound throughout the room very evenly, and I didn't find any bad seats in the room, even though it was a smaller room than the Acora room, but it wasn't small. It was still a decent-sized room, and no matter where you sat, it sounded great. It was a little bit warmer than the Acora speakers, and I like that little bit of warmth. I think really the unsung hero of the MBL room was the amplifiers, because we are talking about systems here, not just speakers. These are extremely expensive, extremely powerful amplifiers. In fact, they were putting out 840 watts per channel into the MBL 101 speakers. They had an iron grip on those speakers, and the bass reflected it. And no matter what you played, no matter what volume, there was no strain whatsoever. That captured me and made it a contender for Best of Show.
Two comments regarding the Acora in that regard, which may indeed contribute to its ascendancy. And that is that compared to the previous speakers from this manufacturer, they are very, very sensitive. They're going to be rated at close to 95 dB. So the demands in terms of amplification may not be excessive. The second thing is that I am so used to the requirement for a large room and very physically large loudspeakers to get the scale that many of us crave in our listening. So that requires very often a palatial environment and physically large speakers. The Acora VRC speakers are only 52 inches tall, and although they weigh a great deal, they don't have much of a footprint. And Val Acora insists, and it would be wonderful to get the chance to find out, that these speakers will work in many typical domestic spaces, as he said, as little as a 15 by 15 foot space. So the idea of being able to get this grandeur, this implacability in some place other than a hotel ballroom is intriguing.
So that's our summary of new products and best sound of the show. Hope you've enjoyed it, and hope to see you next year at the Florida International Audio Expo.
International.